It's strange how the most insignificant moments can reveal the truth that's been staring you in the face all along. For me, it was the way Marlene set my coffee cup in front of me that morning too forcefully, like she was barely holding something in. The ceramic clinked against the table, and a few drops sloshed over the rim. That should have been my first clue. "You're up late," she said, her voice overly casual as she sat across from me. I glanced at her, taking in the way she avoided eye contact. Couldn't sleep. Truth was, I hadn't been sleeping well for months. Something about our marriage had shifted slowly, subtly, until I no longer recognized the woman sitting across from me. The warmth that used to fill our home had faded into something colder, more distant. Conversations had become strained, her laughter less frequent. And then came the favor. She cleared her throat, stirring sugar into her coffee with unnecessary force. "Ira, I need you to do something for me." I set my spoon down, already feeling the tension in my shoulders. "What is it?" She hesitated. "I need you to give my brother your credit card. Just for a little while." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. When it didn't come, I let out a breath. "You can't be serious." Her expression hardened. "He's struggling, okay? And it's not like we don't have the money." The word hit me like a punch to the gut. It was my money. The late nights, the stress, the endless hours I poured into my job, that was all me. And yet, she said it like she had any right to hand it away. I shook my head. "No, Marlene. I'm not doing that. Your brother." Before I could finish, I felt it. Scalding heat. Blinding pain. The coffee cup was empty now, its contents dripping from my face onto my shirt. My breath caught in my throat as my skin burned, my vision blurring from the shock. And there she was, standing over me, her hands still frozen in midair, her chest rising and falling with shallow, angry breaths. I reached up, touching my face, feeling the sting where the liquid had hit my skin. "Did you just—" "You're so selfish," she spat, her eyes flashing with something I couldn't quite place. "You never do anything for me." I pushed my chair back slowly, my hands gripping the edges of the table as I willed myself to stay calm. My mind raced, not just from the pain, but from the realization that had finally settled in. This wasn't love. It hadn't been for a long time. And suddenly, I knew. She never expected what was coming next. The silence that followed was deafening. The coffee dripped from my chin onto my shirt, soaking into the fabric, the heat still tingling on my skin. But the pain wasn't just from the burn, it was from the look in her eyes. Cold. Indifferent. Almost as if she didn't recognize me anymore. Or maybe I was the one who hadn't recognized her all this time. Marlene just stood there, her fingers still curled as if she were ready to throw something else. The woman I married would have gasped, rushed to grab a towel, and apologized profusely. But this Marlene? She simply stared at me with frustration, like I was the problem. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my shirt, inhaling deeply to keep my voice even. "You threw hot coffee on me." She rolled her eyes. "Oh, stop being dramatic, Ira. It's just coffee. Just coffee." I pushed back my chair and stood up slowly, my heart pounding in my ears. "No, Marlene. This isn't just coffee. This is you thinking you can do whatever you want and get away with it." She crossed her arms, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I asked you for one small thing, and you act like I'm the worst wife in the world." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "One small thing? You wanted me to hand my credit card over to your brother. The same guy who borrowed my tools and never returned them, crashed my car and made me pay for the repairs, and, let's not forget, stole from his last 3 jobs." Her face twisted in irritation. "You always bring up the past, like people don't deserve second chances." I shook my head, stepping past her toward the sink. I let the cold water run over a dish towel before pressing it against my face, the sting from the burn dulling slightly. My reflection in the kitchen window caught my eye. I barely recognized myself anymore. The man standing there wasn't just hurt, he was exhausted. "You know what, Marlene?" My voice came out steadier than I expected. "This isn't about your brother." "It never was." She scoffed. "Oh, here we go. What is it about then, genius?" I turned to face her, leaning back against the counter. "It's about you. About how you've changed. About how you don't respect me anymore." She let out a sharp laugh. "Respect? You think respect means saying yes to everything you say? You think respect means letting you control everything in this marriage?" I stared at her, my fingers tightening around the damp towel. "Control?" My voice dropped. "Marlene, I've done everything to make this marriage work. I've ignored the red flags. I've given you the benefit of the doubt. I let things slide because I loved you. But this is the moment I realized I was the only one trying. For the first time that morning, she hesitated. It was small, just the briefest flicker of doubt in her eyes before she hardened again. So what are you saying? I exhaled slowly, setting the towel down on the counter. My hands trembled slightly, but not from pain. From the weight of the decision I had just made in my mind. I'm saying I'm done pretending. I'm done being the only one fighting for this marriage. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something, but no words came out. She had expected me to yell, to fight, to give her something to argue about. Instead, I was calm, certain. I grabbed my phone from the table and turned toward the hallway. "Where are you going?" she demanded, her voice sharper now. I paused but didn't look back. To get some space. And for the first time in years, I wasn't just leaving the room to cool off. I was leaving to figure out if there was anything left worth saving. I stepped out onto the porch, inhaling the crisp morning air, letting the cool breeze settle my nerves. My hands were still trembling, not from the burn but from the realization that had hit me like a freight train. I didn't know who Marlene was anymore. Or maybe, just maybe, I had never really known her at all. The neighborhood was quiet, only the occasional rustling of leaves breaking the silence. It was almost laughable. Out here, everything looked normal. Birds chirping, a couple of joggers passing by, the world going about its usual business. But inside that house, my marriage had just shattered in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. I pulled out my phone, staring at the screen. Who was I even supposed to call? My parents? No, they had always loved Marlene. My friends? Most of them had drifted away over the years, as if they could sense the slow, inevitable decay of my relationship before I even saw it. Without thinking, I dialed a number I hadn't used in months. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice picked up. Ira. It was my older sister, Gwen. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Yeah. Hey. She paused. What's wrong? That was the thing about Gwen. She never needed small talk. She could always tell when something was off. I swallowed hard. Marlene. She threw hot coffee on me this morning. A sharp intake of breath. She what? I sighed, rubbing a hand over my face. She wanted me to give my credit card to her brother. When I said no, she lost it. And now, I'm standing outside trying to figure out how the hell I let things get this bad. Silence. Then, her voice dropped into something more serious. Ira, listen to me. This isn't normal. This isn't okay. I stared down at the steps, my foot tapping absently against the wood. I know. I knew. But at the same time, I didn't want to. Admitting it out loud meant facing the truth I'd been running from. You need to get out of there, Gwen said firmly. At least for a while. Come stay with me. I let out a humorless chuckle. And tell Marlene what? That I need a vacation from my own marriage. You don't have to tell her anything. You need space, Ira. Real space. Not just stepping outside for a breath of fresh air. I opened my mouth to argue. But deep down, I knew she was right. I had spent years making excuses, believing that if I just tried a little harder, things would go back to the way they used to be. But Marlene wasn't the woman I married. And I wasn't sure she had been for a long time. I'll think about it, I muttered, though we both knew that wasn't true. My mind was already made up. Don't just think about it, Gwen pressed. Do it. And when you do, I'll be here. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Thanks, Gwen. I hung up and stared at my phone for a long moment, my thoughts swirling. When I finally turned around and stepped back inside, Marlene was standing there, arms crossed, waiting for me. Where'd you go? She asked, her voice too casual. I met her gaze, my heart hammering in my chest. Out. She narrowed her eyes. You were on the phone. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. For the first time in our marriage, I wasn't explaining myself. I wasn't scrambling to fix things, to make her feel better. I was just done. And I think she could see it. Because for the first time that morning, a flicker of something crossed her face. Not anger. Not frustration. Fear. Marlene's expression hardened as she stood there in the doorway, arms crossed, her fingers gripping her elbows so tightly that her knuckles turned white. But that flicker of fear, the one I caught just for a second, was already buried beneath her usual cold indifference. So now you're just walking out on conversations? Since when did you become that guy? Her voice was sharp, laced with accusation. I exhaled slowly, closing the door behind me. Since when did I have to justify needing some fresh air? Her lips parted as if she had a response ready, but for once, she hesitated. She didn't like this version of me, the one who wasn't scrambling to make things better, the one who wasn't trying to calm her down. I set my phone on the counter and walked past her, heading for the bedroom. I could feel her eyes burning into my back as I opened the closet and grabbed my duffel bag. Wait, what are you doing? I didn't answer at first. I just started packing. A few shirts. A couple of pairs of jeans. My phone charger. Every move felt surreal, like my body was acting on instincts I hadn't even processed yet. Marlene stepped into the room, her arms still folded across her chest. Ira, I asked you a question. I zipped the bag halfway before pausing to meet her gaze. I'm leaving for a few days. Her face twisted in disbelief. Are you serious? Yeah, I said simply. I am. She let out a short, humorless laugh. Wow, so this is what it comes down to? I throw a little coffee, and suddenly you're running away like some wounded puppy. I clenched my jaw. This isn't about the coffee, Marlene. You know that. Then what? Enlighten me, because from where I'm standing, you're overreacting like crazy. I let out a breath and sat down on the edge of the bed, running a hand through my hair. It's about how this marriage doesn't feel like a marriage anymore. It's about the fact that I don't even recognize you sometimes. And honestly, I think I need space to figure out if this is even worth saving. For the first time, something in her posture shifted. It was small, just the way her fingers twitched slightly at her sides, but it was enough. You're actually thinking about leaving me? Her voice was quieter now, almost uncertain. I met her eyes. I don't know, Marlene, but I do know I can't keep doing this. Her breathing was uneven now, her bravado cracking just a little. And yet, instead of softening, instead of trying to talk to me like a wife who actually wanted to fix things, she did what she always did. She deflected. Oh, I get it now, she said bitterly. You talked to Gwen, didn't you? I blinked. What? Your sister. That's who you called outside, wasn't it? I didn't say anything, which was answer enough. Marlene scoffed, shaking her head. Of course. Of course she's involved in this. She's always hated me, Ira. Always. And now she's finally got what she wanted, you turning against me. I frowned, standing up. Gwen isn't the problem here, Marlene. You are. She flinched, like I had actually struck her. For the first time in a long time, I saw something raw flash across her face. Pain? Guilt? Regret? I wasn't sure. But whatever it was, it didn't last long. Her expression steeled again, and she let out a bitter laugh. Fine. Go then. Run away. But don't expect me to be sitting here waiting for you when you come crawling back. I nodded once, grabbing my bag and heading for the door. Noted. I walked down the hallway, my heart pounding, my mind racing. It felt unreal, stepping out of that house, knowing I might not come back. And yet, as I tossed my bag in the passenger seat of my car and slid in behind the wheel, I realized something. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The engine hummed beneath me, waiting. But I didn't pull out of the driveway right away. Instead, I just sat there. The reality of it all hit me like a punch to the gut. I was leaving. Actually leaving. I had spent years convincing myself that things would get better, that Marlene and I just needed time, effort, patience. But now, sitting in this car, I realized how much I had been lying to myself. This wasn't something that just happened. It had been unraveling for a long time. I exhaled, rubbing a hand over my face. I could still feel the faint sting from the coffee she had thrown at me, the dried remnants of it staining my shirt. If someone had told me 5 years ago that my wife would one day throw hot coffee on me over a credit card dispute, I would have laughed in their face. But here I was. A knock on my car window made me jump. My heart lurched into my throat as I turned and saw Marlene standing outside, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. I rolled the window down halfway, bracing myself. She leaned in slightly, her expression unreadable. You're really going? I swallowed. Yeah, I need space. For the first time, she looked uncertain. Not angry. Not cold. Just lost. Where are you even going? She asked, her voice quieter now. I hesitated. Gwen's. Her jaw tightened, and there it was again, the resentment, the defensiveness. Of course, she muttered. You'd rather be with her than with me. I let out a slow breath. Marlene, I'm not doing this to punish you. She scoffed. Could have fooled me. I closed my eyes for a second, willing myself to stay calm. I need time to think. To figure out if this, I gestured between us, is even fixable. She was silent for a moment, her gaze flickering to the ground. And if it's not? I gripped the wheel again, my chest tightening. Then we have to be honest about that. Her breath hitched, and for a split second, I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen in a long time. Fear. Not fear of me, but fear of losing me. You always said you'd never leave, she whispered. I swallowed hard. I never thought I'd have to. She took a step back, wrapping her arms around herself like she was trying to hold herself together. Fine, she muttered. Go. Do whatever you need to do. I nodded, rolling the window up and putting the car into reverse. As I backed out of the driveway, she stood there, watching me, her face unreadable. And as I drove away, I realized something terrifying. I didn't feel relief. I felt grief. Like I had just left behind a part of myself I'd never get back. The highway stretched endlessly before me, a ribbon of asphalt disappearing into the horizon. The hum of the engine filled the silence, but my thoughts drowned out everything else. My hands were stiff from gripping the wheel, my breath coming slow and measured. I had left, and yet I wasn't free. The past few hours kept replaying in my mind. The coffee, the argument, the way Marlene had looked at me when she realized I was serious. But there was something else, something gnawing at my gut, an unease I couldn't shake. I should have just kept driving. I should have focused on getting to Gwen's, putting distance between myself and the mess I had left behind. But a strange feeling crept up my spine, something that made me hesitate. Without thinking, I unlocked my phone and opened the location-sharing app Marlene and I had set up years ago. It was supposed to be for emergencies, for peace of mind when one of us traveled. I rarely checked it, but now I did. My stomach tightened as I saw where she was. Not at home, not at work. A hotel. A sharp breath caught in my throat. I blinked, staring at the screen, hoping it was some sort of glitch. But the location didn't waver. I swallowed hard, my pulse pounding in my ears. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe she had booked a room to clear her head after the argument. Maybe she needed space, just like I did. But deep down, I already knew. I took the next exit, my mind racing. I wasn't even sure what I was doing or what I expected to find. Maybe I wasn't ready to see the truth. Maybe part of me still hoped there was a misunderstanding. By the time I pulled into the parking lot of the hotel, my chest felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. The neon vacancy sign flickered above the entrance, casting an eerie glow across the pavement. I sat there for a moment, gripping the wheel, trying to steady my breathing. This was a mistake. A stupid, impulsive mistake. But something inside me wouldn't let me turn around. I stepped out of the car and walked toward the entrance. The air was cool against my skin, but my palms were sweating. The hotel lobby was quiet, the receptionist barely glancing up as I walked past. I checked my phone again. 4th floor, room 418. The elevator ride felt like an eternity. My reflection stared back at me in the mirrored walls, my face tense, my jaw clenched. When the door slid open, I stepped into the hallway. The soft hum of the air conditioning filled the silence. My footsteps felt too loud against the carpet. I reached the door. Room 418. I raised my hand and knocked. Silence. Then, after a long pause, the sound of footsteps. The door cracked open, and there she was, Marlene. Her expression froze the second she saw me. For a split second, she looked caught off guard, like someone who had been expecting a different visitor. She clutched the edge of the door, her posture stiff. Ira, what are you doing here? My throat felt tight. My heart pounded, but my voice came out calm. Funny, I said quietly. I was just about to ask you the same thing. I gripped the steering wheel, my breath coming in shallow bursts as I stared at the screen. My mind scrambled to make sense of what I was seeing. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she had gone to meet a friend. Maybe. No. Stop it. I knew better. I had spent years brushing aside the things I didn't want to believe, convincing myself that the woman I married wasn't capable of betrayal. But standing in my kitchen just hours ago, coffee dripping down my face, I had finally seen the truth. And now here it was. I should have kept driving. I should have ignored the way my stomach twisted, the way my pulse pounded in my ears. But I couldn't. Not yet. Not until I knew. My hands tightened on the wheel as I took the next exit, my heart hammering harder with each mile that brought me closer to that hotel. I wasn't even sure what I would do when I got there. Confront her? Walk away? Would I even be able to? I pulled into the parking lot of the hotel and shut off the engine, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard it felt like my fingers might snap. The neon vacancy sign flickered in the evening light, the parking lot half full. I sat there for a moment, my chest rising and falling in slow, controlled breaths. This was a mistake. A stupid, impulsive mistake. but my body moved before my mind could stop it. I stepped out of the car, feeling like I was moving in slow motion. The hotel was nothing special, a mid-range chain, the kind of place business travelers stayed when their flights got canceled. I walked toward the entrance, my stomach in knots, my ears ringing. Inside, the lobby was quiet. A young guy sat behind the desk, barely glancing up from his computer screen. I forced myself to keep moving, my feet heavy against the tile floor. My fingers hovered over my phone, my mind screaming at me to stop, to think. Instead, I opened our shared location app again. 4th floor. Room 418. I stepped into the elevator, my reflection staring back at me in the mirrored walls. My face looked different. Strained. Tired. Like I had aged 10 years in the past 10 hours. When the door slid open, I stepped into the hallway, my heart hammering in my chest. The beige carpeting muffled my footsteps as I walked past door after door, each one identical, each one leading to a different story. And then I was there. Room 418. I stared at the number for what felt like an eternity. My mind screamed at me to turn around, to leave before I saw something I couldn't unsee. But I had already come this far. I raised my fist and knocked. Silence. Then, after a long pause, the sound of footsteps. The door cracked open, and there she was, Marlene. Her hair was messy, her makeup smudged like she had been rubbing her face. She was wearing a robe, the kind hotels provided, the belt tied loosely at her waist. And when she saw me, her eyes went wide with something that wasn't shock. It was guilt. I didn't need to see inside the room. I didn't need any more proof. I already knew. She swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the door. Ira, what are you doing here? My mouth was dry. My throat felt tight. Funny, I said, my voice quiet. I was just about to ask you the same thing. Marlene stood frozen in the doorway, her fingers tightening around the edge of the doorframe as if she could physically hold back the truth. The guilt in her eyes told me everything I needed to know, but still, she tried to control the moment, tried to control me, just like always. She let out a short breath, smoothing a hand over her robe. Ira, this isn't. Don't. My voice was steady, but my hands were shaking at my sides. Just don't. Her lips pressed into a thin line. You followed me? I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. No, Marlene. I left. I left because I finally saw what our marriage had turned into. I left because I needed space. But then I checked our location tracker, our emergency tracker, remember? And I saw that you were here. At a hotel. I gestured toward her robe. And now I get to stand here and listen to you try and spin it into something else. She flinched, but the anger came just as quickly. You had no right to check my location. And you had no right to throw hot coffee in my face. But here we are. Her mouth snapped shut. For the first time, she didn't have an immediate comeback. She was floundering, searching for something, anything, that would let her regain control. The door creaked open just a little more, and then I saw it. The unmistakable outline of a suitcase on the floor behind her. Someone else's suitcase. A lump formed in my throat, but I didn't let my face change. I just let out a breath and nodded to myself. How long? Marlene blinked. What? How long? My voice was flat, emotionless, but inside, my chest was caving in. She hesitated for a second too long. It's not. Don't lie to me, Marlene, I said, my voice sharper now. Not this time. Her shoulders sagged, her gaze dropping to the floor. A few months. A few months. I had spent years fighting for this marriage. I had twisted myself into someone else, someone more patient, more forgiving, more willing to believe that things would get better. And all that time, she had been meeting someone else in hotel rooms. I let out a slow exhale, forcing my hands to unclench. You could have just told me, you know. Her head snapped up, her expression tight. Told you what? That she cut herself off, her breath shaky. That you didn't love me anymore. I finished for her. The words hung between us, suffocating. She swallowed hard. Doesn't matter, I interrupted. I see it now. I should have seen it a long time ago. I turned before she could say another word, my body moving on autopilot. Ira. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps steady. I hit the elevator button and waited. The doors slid open. I stepped inside, my reflection staring back at me in the mirrored walls. I expected to feel anger, rage, betrayal, but all I felt was relief. I was finally free. As I stepped into the parking lot, my phone buzzed. A message from Gwen. Everything okay? I stared at the screen for a long moment before finally typing a response. Yeah, it will be. I hit send, climbed into my car, and drove away without looking back.